Okay. Welcome everyone to Rapid Diffs Frontend Architecture Weekly. It's just two of us, and we have one topic to discuss. Sorry, give me just a second. Okay. So I have good news about UX refactoring. I've talked with Natalia a bit about their Nodes app, which uses UX extensively, and we also import quite a lot of stuff from Nodes. So she told me that basically Nodes app is considered a legacy app. That means they do not plan to do really big refactoring or add lots of features to that app. And for us, that also means we can be a little bit more aggressive on the refactoring side. So if we would like to extract some of the logic we need just for the rapid diffs, we can do so. So that's good news for us. How exactly it will look like, I have no idea so far. But that's good news nevertheless. I have one question, is like, any thoughts on Pinia so far? If you have, like, should we try it out? Or like considerations? Because so far the only consideration I've heard is like, we have Apollo, but I don't think we are writing our global state in Apollo State Manager. So yeah, just an observation question.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that for things we need to replace Vuex or need to use Vuex in, it would be good to find a lighter weight, more intuitive alternative. Uh, my stance, I don't know if you've ever heard my stance, Stanislav, but my stance is generally speaking that like a global store is itself indicative of a bad pattern. Like we shouldn't need a global store. However, in the sense of Vuex or even Apollo or any of those things, because well, the short answer is because we have storage mechanisms already, and then local state can be managed at components or at like parent component levels. We shouldn't need a global variable to do that stuff. However, we have a lot of those things already in our product. So if Pinia reduces our footprint and reduces overhead and those sorts of things, I think it's probably a good idea. I haven't used it though, so I can't give you any like here's my experience type stuff. So
And by global variable, you mean like when we have a store that just stores everything, like all the discussions,
yeah,
I don't know, feature
yeah,
flags, some random flags, loading flags, this stuff,
yeah,
right?
everything. Yeah,
That's I completely agree on the stance. Like I hate that we have a Vuex store that takes like 500 lines just for the actions or mutations. Like
yeah,
that's insane complexity just in
yeah,
one store. And that's not considered like a big store. Like for diffs, it can be 3-4 times bigger.
yeah,
And when Pinia actually excels is in splitting that logic. So it's no longer just a single store that has all the data.
mm,
You can have like 50 little stores just for a single purpose. Like for example, you have discussions. You can just have a store only for discussions, and it will handle all the data, all the flags, all the actions, and you can directly import that store in another store. Let's say we have a div that has some store that manages another data flow. I don't know what, but let's imagine we have that. You can just import that store directly in the getters or in action and call that store state without actually needing to store it all in one single store that has all the information about everything. And that is a really radical change from Vuex. So we can actually start thinking more about concerns than like putting it all in the Vuex and just leaving it up there. Also, as far as I understand, Pinia is much better for handling async stores. So you might know that we have like lazy loading for Vuex in the Diffs app, and that is because we have separate store for nodes, separate store for diffs.
Right.
And before we changed that, it all was created instantaneously, and that slowed the page significantly because we will have to basically fetch nodes, render them, but they won't be actually visible to the user, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And we had to come up with some clever ideas in how we manage that state, so we don't do things that we don't actually need. And with Pinia, I think you just call a function to like import the store. You can even like use async imports, and it will be created on the fly without any need for creating the store in advance, which is a drastic difference from Vuex, which doesn't support that.
Yeah.
So it brings a lot of benefits to our current approaches, and I don't think we are ditching Nodes app anytime soon. Like it will stay. Probably the issues will migrate to something else, but for us, I think we'll just keep the Nodes app.
Yeah.
And since we'll have to keep it, it makes sense for me at least to start like slowly and gradually refactor some of the state to smaller states with Pinia.
Yeah.
And an obvious candidate for that is discussions. Like put all the discussions in a small Pinia state, and it will handle just the discussions, only stuff that works with them without any need for like loading flags and stuff like this. So that was my thought process, like on approaching the refactorings, because I think we definitely need this to be done. Otherwise, like you can open the POC and see how much code there is there just for dealing with Vuex, because if you don't initiate all the state in advance, your app just won't work. Like it heavily relies on this stuff.
Yeah.
So that is my observation so far.
Yeah.
On Pinia.
For sure, I've absolutely noticed, or it's been a long running pain point that the Notes app and the Diffs app Vuex stores have to like constantly communicate with each other, and have to both exist in order for Diffs to work. So it would be really great to start refactoring that. Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see how it works out.
Sure. Anything else you'd like to discuss about Vuex?
No, I don't think so. I think it's good. Good.
I'll also mention that I think we have some of the mixins that rely on Vuex state. And that makes things even more complicated.
Yeah, you're right.
Because it's just completely non-obvious. Like when you go to a component, you see some variable on this, and it doesn't point to anything. And then you see 7 mixins in the component. And good luck trying to figure out which of the components initiates that variable.
Yeah.
So we might actually want to maybe pair refactoring of the Vuex and some refactoring of the mixins, because if we try to make things a little bit more clear, it makes sense to just ditch the mixins for that specific part. So like if it uses Vuex and if it's just for the UX, we should maybe consider refactoring it to composition API or to something else.
Yeah.
And combine that with Pinia, because that makes a lot more sense than just move to Pinia and leave mixins and still be completely unclear, like how is the data flow looking like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't particularly run into issues with mixins before, but to your point, that's just because they kind of live over there and do their own thing. So yeah, I imagine when we start refactoring, it's going to be a mess. So, and you're saying if it has a mixin, we should also refactor that alongside replacing Vuex. Is that what you're saying?
At least it makes sense to me. Like
Yeah.
if we try to remove UX to make things a lot more clear, because Pinia has clear dependencies,
Yeah.
and we continue to use mixins, we are not dealing with the problem like full scale. It's just
Yeah.
partially resolving some of the issues, but it's still not clear how we are defining these variables or these methods.
Yeah.
And with composition API, it's all very obvious. Like you just import the stuff, you get it out of the composition API. And
Yeah.
for me, it makes sense to combine these two things. So it's all
Yeah.
clear and obvious how we are dealing with data flows.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. I would definitely not want to leave something that sort of like relies on the old model.
Yeah, I'm actually interested in how much of mixins we are using. Yeah, I think it's mostly for discussions. And we have this diff line node for mixin, which is like 130 lines. And I have zero idea what it does, but it uses lots of state from UX.
Yeah.
So this one will be my biggest candidate for refactoring because
Sure.
I have zero idea of how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we can put it in a separate issue to make sure like everyone agrees on that point. We have another topic for performance DOM manipulation. Would you like to discuss it now? I think it was
Sure.
Andrea that was really concerned with like DOM manipulations.
I see.
But
Yeah.
we can discuss it here as well. Let me see how the topic was created. So I think Andrea was concerned a little bit with how web components would do DOM manipulations. I can add some clarity here. So web components will actually do only atomic DOM manipulations. So it will be like create node, attach node, remove node, work with attributes. It won't use like inner HTML and put it in the div.
Sure.
So it will be really, really minimal. And in that case, I think most of the DOM manipulations will actually come from Vue. So where we attach a discussions app, Vue will handle all the discussions rendering logic, and we will just attach the app itself to the div file. So it won't be anything more than that. In that case, like I'm not really concerned about DOM manipulations with web components. I'm mostly concerned about style recalculations and repaints. Like that's the most harmful thing for our divs at this point. And if you go to a streaming POC, you can actually see that in the performance panel, at some point we start to add, when we reach a certain threshold of divs on the page, it gets really, really slow. And if you try to add even one more div, just doing that can freeze the page for like 200 milliseconds, just because we have so much stuff on the page already. And for that case, I think our best savior is content visibility, which is not properly implemented in Chrome right now. So I'll be working on that this week, I guess, because we have to fix it. And Chrome team is actually taking a closer look at this. So this is really good news. other than that, our best scenario is just optimizing CSS, like making sure we are not applying really complex layouts on the page. So if we make it so that the layout doesn't actually take too long to repaint or recalculate, that will make things easier for us.
Yeah. So you mentioned the web component would use basic sort of like atomic operations, like creating nodes and stuff, removing nodes.
Yep.
If the file is streaming, I guess I'm not 100% sure how like the mechanics of this work, but how often is that happening? Like, is it, let's say it's streaming 100 files.
Yeah.
It's not doing those sequentially, right? It's doing those in parallel, or I assume it would be doing those in parallel.
No. It depends on what you mean doing. Like, do you mean like streaming, the actual rendering in the browser?
Yeah. So I mean, HTML is going to be delivered to the web component, right? Which is then going to insert it into the DOM.
No, it's different from that. So it works like this. We have a separate document that is a part of our original document, and
Okay.
we start writing to the document. We actually don't see this document at all. We just stream to the document and attach it to our root document, right? So
Okay.
it's just using external document to render the stuff. It's mostly like iframe, but
Yeah.
instead of isolation, it's completely accessible DOM, and it affects everything. And it streams with document.write, like that's old method, but it still works. And it works mostly like if you've loaded your document from the scratch. Like when you first open the page, it starts streaming in your browser. This approach uses basically the same logic, but we can control it with JavaScript. And as soon as the component is fully rendered on the client, not the component, but the diff file, it will have diff file web component element that will start the web component. And the reason why we're not wrapping the whole diff file in this element is because it actually starts immediately right away. It doesn't wait for all the child nodes to finish streaming.
Sure.
So we'll have to basically find the closing tag of the diff file. We will then, the server will send us an element for the web component. It will start. It will use, I think it will use some kind of ID to get the file from the DOM. And it can perform some initial logic. Maybe it will be content visibility related, so it can actually stop re-rendering. And it might use intersection observer because we might not want to create all the stuff for the components that we don't see. And I think that's it mostly. As soon as we progress more in the development area, we'll see more of the logic added to this web component. I think the only stuff that web component will render immediately will be discussions, because I can imagine like people searching with Control F for specific user of a discussion or specific text in the discussion. So we will have to render that immediately as soon as we have the data for discussions. Apart from that, I think that's it. Like it won't do much on the initial render.
So you said that the streaming goes to a separate document that's not visible.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like, are you talking about shadow DOM type stuff? What's the?
No.
Okay.
It's like a completely separate thing. A good way to understand that is to think of iframes. Like you can replace this external document with an iframe. Let's imagine we are creating a new iframe and we are gradually adding HTML to that iframe.
Yeah.
So we just progressively renders. Then we take that iframe root element and we just attach it to our document. Okay. So basically that's all we are doing. We don't have to use inner HTML or append node. We just reattach the node from iframe to our document, and it works.
And this is outside. So what I'm getting at here is every time we write to those documents, it's not affecting the paint cycle, right? Like it's an inert outside the rendered document.
Since if we do not attach the node to our original document, it won't affect anything.
Yeah.
But once we attach the node, it affects everything. Like it's fully like actionable HTML and DOM. You can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. And we don't attach it until it's
everything.
done streaming, right?
No, we attach it right away. So
okay.
As soon as we have the first byte of HTML, we attach this to our document. So you can actually see the diff files gradually rendering.
So we are going to get a ton of repaints as a result of streaming, right?
Yeah, and we actually, sorry.
I was just gonna say, as every byte comes in, it'll repaint all those subdocuments.
That's true. We thought about that. So we have two precautions for that. The first one is we try to minimize operations on the DOM. So when we receive HTML from the network request, we wait just a bit to fill the current buffer. It can be any size. And it tries not to do insert me 50 symbols as a separate operations. It tries to collect all the 50 symbols into a single string and then insert that at once. And it has some logic around timeouts. So if we don't receive HTML for a certain period, just insert whatever you have so we can see the content. Don't keep it in the buffer. And the second precaution is content visibility. With content visibility, you fully disable rendering of the diff file. It basically no longer exists. It's just a placeholder with a specific height.
Yeah.
And it doesn't cause any re-renders or repaints. It's just empty. The problem is with Chrome, because if you have lots of these elements on the page, your scrolling starts to feel really slow. You scroll through the page and scroll just might get stuck at some point. And after 2-second delay, it will go to your cursor, but it feels very chunky. And Chrome is aware of that, and they're actually asking for help to debug this, because I think we might be the only one using it on a full-scale production environment. I think no one's using content visibility with thousands of elements.
Yeah.
So that's why no one actually ran into that problem.
Yeah.
And as soon as we fix it, the problem should be mostly mitigated. We won't have repaints that take half a second, right?
Yeah.
So keeping fingers crossed for that.
Okay. All right, cool.
Any last points? Anything else to discuss?
I guess I would bring up that unless we are pulling in an existing application, for example, we're probably going to do minimal refactor. Well, as minimal as possible. It's going to be a lot, but minimal refactoring on the discussions app. Pull that in. I would say any of our own code probably shouldn't layer Vue on top of web components. We should, if we're writing logic from scratch, it should probably just be web components, with the exception of bringing in existing Vue stuff, like discussions.
I think discussions is quite complex app. I agree on the basic premise that smaller logic should be in the web component. And I think that will happen, for example, for the diff file header, the stuff that can collapse the file and mark it as viewed.
Yeah.
I think we'll write that just in pure JavaScript without using Vue, because I don't see why we should be doing that. But for complex stuff like discussions, since it can have like 1,000 of states just for the discussions, it makes sense to like to use Vue, because Vue is actually really good when we have to update a really complex app in the most performant way. Like it knows which elements do need to be updated specifically. And if we start to write that in JavaScript, we'll have to basically code all this logic into the app itself, which is kind of hard to
Oh
maintain.
yeah, I would not suggest manually implementing like a DOM differ or like a DOM manipulation tool. I would just suggest using something that's more surgical. Like a what's the I think it was called
You mean like Svelte?
well, yeah, like Svelte. I dislike Svelte because it overrides the basics of JavaScript. You have to have a compiler to use it. It doesn't work without a compiler. Um, there was like a technology called HTMX, I think, or no, Hyper HTML. Hyper HTML is what it was. That kind of spawned a large family of things. Lit is the biggest, newest one. Lit elements, where they sort of lean into all of the templating built into HTML and that sort of stuff. And then when data updates, they update just the dynamic bit that changed. Because I mean, it's you can pull that down in like 7K or something or 10K instead of dozens and dozens and dozens of kilobytes of JavaScript to update the DOM. So, but yeah, I would not suggest we do it ourselves. I would just suggest that we lean into like web components and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I'll have to dig deeper in how Lit does that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what do they do to make it performant. But like Vue works for us right now. If we
Yeah.
look at the app, if we
Yeah.
render just one discussion in the viewport, like it's not slow. Like you can do whatever you want. It's not lagging at all.
No.
And since we have like most of the code written in Vue, makes sense to just like keep it, like don't ever touch it, because as soon as you touch it, things start to break. Yeah, and also like it feels like adding a new technology to GitLab is kind of hard at this point, because we have so much stuff already, and people like even Pinia, which is an obvious win for the GitLab, it gets welcomed with like and disapproval from
Yeah.
people because they don't think we should be refactoring stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
which makes sense, I guess.
it is very hard to get changes into GitLab. I do think, though, that at some point we have to just say, this is we have different needs in this product than other parts of the company. Because, well, this is a personal gripe, but we're constantly told that like our needs are very unique to us. Like, for example, with GitLab UI, our needs are very unique to us, and like they're not going to solve that problem. And then we're also told that we need to use the standard thing. Like, for example, you don't switch away from Vuex. And so those two things are in conflict. We do have unique needs, and yet we're not allowed to like make unique changes. So I think at some point we just say, listen, we need smaller libraries that do more surgical things because it has to be super fast. Maybe now is not the right time, but we have to do it at some point.
Yeah, it coincides with the CSS problems we have as well. Like GitLab has chosen a direction into the atomic styling like many years ago. I wasn't at GitLab at that point because I would have tried to prevent that, because I think that's kind of destructive to our code base.
Yeah.
But we are at such a point that we cannot actually use this technology. Like for us, it's a no-go, because we cannot afford to store hundreds of atomic classes in our cache. It's just a huge waste on the caching part.
Yeah.
So we'll have to find an alternative. And right now there is no such alternative in GitLab. Like there is none at all. The same is for Apollo, right? We a lot of folks say that Apollo like is the future in GitLab, and that might as well be. But for us, Apollo doesn't make a lot of sense because we have lots of state and it's mostly local state.
Hmm.
And putting it all in Apollo feels like we are finding we're developing a solution looking for a problem, not actually solving the problem itself.
Yeah.
And we don't have an alternative to Apollo because we have banned Vuex, which also makes us like handcuffed. We cannot do anything.
Right.
We cannot use existing generally accepted solutions.
Yeah.
And we basically have to sell our specific needs for all the GitLab to add them just for the diffs, which is kind of weird situation to have.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm hoping that with this product we just pull the Band-Aid off and make those like radical changes that deviate from the product and say we're just not going to do the existing path. We're going to kind of forge our own. And I don't know how much of that we can get happening, but that would be my hope.
Yeah, I agree. So, anything else?
Nah, I think that's good. I was hoping that Andre would show up at some point here. I guess he's in a one-on-one with Kai now.
Yeah, probably. Okay, so we still have stuff to discuss for the next week. So hopefully we'll have more people next time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Stanislav.
Yeah, we had good discussions. See you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Have a good day.